Welcome to another Jabba's Palace roll call. Today's character, Hermi Odle.
Pichang wangchi kochpa, pang nanni tukchanki turoi, solo thotubake chaya.
Look, R2, Captain Solo, and he's still frozen in carbonite. Hang on a minute, who's that? That was none other than Hermi Odle, but I'm sure many Star Wars fans never even noticed he was in this scene. Like many characters from Jabba's palace, he was essentially made to fill out the background of some of the scenes in the palace, and then later on they retroactively made a backstory for him. The costume for Hermi Odle was based on a maquette, or a small statue, created by Phil Tippett, who was, of course, responsible for so many of the designs of creatures from Jabba's palace. According to Wikipedia, Tony McVeigh may have been the one who actually built the screen-used costume, although it doesn't seem like we know for sure. We do know for sure that Philip Herbert was actually in the costume. He was credited as a mime performer on Return of the Jedi. Daryl James from the YouTube channel Star Wars 100 Interviews recently posted an interview with Mr. Herbert, and that was the first time I had ever heard from him. It's well worth watching the entire interview. It's only about 5 minutes long. But in the interview, he comments about how he was originally hired as a day performer and kept being told to come back every day for about 3.5 weeks, which is kind of impressive when you consider how little screen time he actually got. In fact, the scene that I showed at the beginning of the video is essentially his only appearance. I did, I think, spot him in the background of this scene here, where Han and Luke are being brought back after Luke defeats the Rancor, but you can only just barely see him in the background. Let me know if you've managed to spot Hermi Odle in any other scenes. The fact that he didn't appear more often might have something to do with his size. He is quite gigantic, actually bigger, or at least taller, than Jabba without his tail, and similar in size to Efount Mon, so he may have just been logistically difficult to include in other scenes. Unlike many characters that were referred to by a nickname during filming and then later on had an in-universe name applied to them, as you can see from this list of creatures that was used in production of Return of the Jedi, he pretty much had that name from the very beginning, although his original name was Hemi Moroid. If you look this character up on Wikipedia, this is mentioned in his entry as a nickname, but then it says immediately afterward that his name is likely a take on Hear Me Yodel, which makes absolutely no sense to me. Let's remember that hemimoroid is basically just hemorrhoid. And yes, this is what the character looked like, let's remember. So it seems pretty obvious to me that they came up with hemimoroid as a name and then decided to change it up a little bit so it wasn't quite as obvious. For their trading cards in 1983, Topps decided to sidestep the naming issue altogether and just call him Horrendous Creature, which seems a little rude. There's not a huge amount of backstory available for Hermi Odle. He's not mentioned at all, as far as I can tell, in Star Wars Tales from Jabba's Palace, but he did appear briefly in the novelization of Return of the Jedi by James Caan. He's mentioned by name a couple of times. In the novel, Hermi Odle was actually sitting on top of C-3PO while Salacious Crumb was attempting to extract the droid's eye, and having him there actually makes the scene make more sense to me. It seemed a little strange that C-3PO couldn't escape from Salacious Crumb, but we don't really see any of this in the film. Of course, that scene from the novel doesn't really tell us much about his background or what kind of character he was, why he was in the palace, and so forth. For that, we have to look to this card from the collectible card game released by Decipher in 1998. It says that he is a Baragwin assigned by Jabba to be the palace's master weaponsmith. He is an enemy of Pote Snitkin, who is another character I guess we will have to look at in another video. Everything I've seen about his backstory online seems to be just kind of slightly elaborating on this. I guess it should come as no surprise that he also doesn't have a lot of merchandise made for him either, although he did appear in the Jabba the Hutt throne room action scene by MPC, released in 1983, and as you can see here on the instructions, he is a 2-part plastic model that you just kind of push together. It's a snap fit, and honestly, for the time, this is a pretty good looking model. But of course he didn't appear in Kenner's Star Wars line, and in fact to get any kind of figure at all we had to wait until 2007 when Hasbro released this figure, and honestly it was probably worth the wait. He's an impressively large figure, and I think he looks pretty much what you would like him to look like as a modern Hermi Odle figure. The most distinctive part, of course, is this soft goods robe that's permanently attached, but he also has some interesting articulation, kind of unusual for a Star Wars figure. He turns at the waist, but his leg articulation is kind of simple, and he has some very odd arm articulation as well, but that's to be expected for kind of a hunchbacked character like this. My favorite part probably is that he has mouth articulation. He can open and close his mouth. So yeah, pretty cool figure. I like the sculpt, and he's a great addition to any Jabba's Palace display. Oh, by the way, here you can see that the cloak is kind of wedged into his body there, so you can't really easily remove it. These 30th anniversary figures did come with collector coins, by the way. This one just says Hermi Odle Baragwin on one side, and then has kind of a generic Return of the Jedi thing on the back with Jabba's clan symbol. Still pretty cool. So that was all we had for a long time, but just this year, a new figure has been released for Hermi Odle, this time from the Next 17, who has been making new figures in a vintage Kenner-esque style, and I made an entire video about those figures, including some from the Cantina as well. So if you want to see more in detail about this figure, go ahead and check that video out. But I do like this one quite a bit, and here you can see if we compare it to the Hasbro version, they're similar in size, and it's interesting to see two different interpretations of this character, one more realistic and one more stylized. Topps did include Hermi Odle in their line of Galactic Connections trading discs in 2015, and he also appeared as a digital trading card in the Star Wars Force Collection app in 2013 onward, but that's pretty much it. I did sort of make my own version of Hermi Odle this Halloween when I carved a Hermi Odle-themed jack-o'-lantern. This was done by scraping off much of the skin of the pumpkin and then sort of carving into it. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm fairly confident this is in the top 10 Hermi Odle-themed jack-o'-lanterns of all time. Well, that's about it for Hermi Odle. He doesn't have nearly as much backstory or merchandise as many of the other characters I've featured in this series, but I think it's still interesting to look at him. Were you even aware that this character existed? And do you have any memories related to him? I'd be interested to know. In the meantime, thanks very much for watching. And very special thanks, of course, go to my Patreon supporters, including these Palace VIPs, and especially my Hut Royalty, Angelica Brady and Jesper Murtu. Thanks very much for your support. Click on the link in the video description if you'd like to know more about how you could support me for as little as $1 a month.